The recent Pittsburgh massacre was the most deadly attack targeting Jews in North American history. Many have noted the rise in anti-Semitism over the last few years. How are we to understand this development?
As with almost any historical development, there are usually a number of causes for any particular development or process that we see unfolding before our eyes. And yet one can and one should point out specific causes for such developments. Here I wish to discuss one particular aspect of this issue, and that is the belief on the part of many white people of European descent, both in North America and in Europe, as well as in other countries such as Australia. The belief of people of European stock that their nations, their countries, and their cultures, their civilizations are essentially on the chopping block, that their way of life, their values, the societal norms and systems to which they are used and to which under which they wish to live, and that they wish to hand down to their children and grandchildren, they believe, and I would agree with them, they believe that their way of life, their identity as people of European stock and people of European descent, and therefore the inheritors of European Western civilization and society, they believe all this is in peril. The reason so many people of this background feel this way is, of course, a direct result of the mass and entirely irresponsible immigration policies of many countries, particularly European countries. As we know, particularly from 2015 onwards, Europe has been inundated with third world immigrants. But in fact this process has been going on for many decades. It began in the UK in the 60s. It began in Australia in the early 70s. Till that time Australia had what was known as the White Australia policy, whereby immigration was limited to people of European background. This policy was very foolishly abandoned in the early 70s. A decision taken by then Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. And this has also been the case in North America for many years now. In Europe in particular, this has accelerated and become a truly enormous crisis for those who wish to see European nations remain exactly what they are, European nations. That is to say, the homelands and the societies for European peoples who wish to remain European, who identify as European, who wish to maintain their cultural heritage, etc. They feel threatened. And again, I reiterate, they are correct to feel so. They are absolutely 100% correct in my view. I think it is a massive crime on the part, I would say even a treasonous act on the part of many politicians in the West for allowing and facilitating such uncontrolled and massive immigration of third world immigrants into these countries. it is also a massive historical act of folly. As a result of this apprehension, many people of European background are looking for those who are responsible, wish to blame, find the people they can blame and attack for what has been going on over, in some cases for decades, in other cases more particularly over the last few years. And it is true, unfortunately, and I think this needs to be frankly admitted by Jews all over the world, that there are, without doubt, Jews involved in those movements and those organizations, very often NGOs, etc., who promote this phenomenon of third world immigration into the Western countries. And the conclusion of these Europeans and Americans is that the Jews are behind this policy, that this is some kind of Jewish conspiracy to water down white American or white European societies, or to inflict irreparable damage on these societies. In some cases I've seen claims made by such people that the Jews are doing this deliberately as an act of revenge against the European nations who discriminated against the Jews for not just for centuries, but actually one could say for millennia, in response to pogroms and massacres and inquisitions, etc., against the Jewish people throughout history, that the Jews are now taking their revenge. And this is exactly the problem. This reading of recent events, and also events going back even 100 years and more, going back to the Russian Revolution and before, this reading of historical developments is entirely, absolutely misunderstood and mistaken. It is a miscomprehension of the true desire and will and purpose of the Jewish people. It is not in any way desirable from the perspective of authentic Torah Judaism that people from the third world be allowed to inundate Western societies and essentially turn them into second world and eventually into third world countries. That is an absolutely false and pernicious claim. The reason many people are reaching these kinds of conclusions is because they see many Jews involved in these movements, many Jews who promote these kinds of agendas. And one cannot deny that that is technically so. There are many people who are biologically and even halachically Jewish, that is to say they are Jewish from the perspective of Jewish law, but in no other sense, in no meaningful sense are they Jewish. These people are have almost without exception have been brought up in homes that were bereft of any Jewish content. These Jews, down to a man and down to a woman, are assimilationist. In other words, their aim is to assimilate into wider Gentile society. That, of course, is the opposite of what authentic Torah-based Judaism preaches. According to the Torah, the Jewish people are a unique people and must have always been and must remain a separate people, as the verse states in the Torah. Hen Am levadad yishkon. This is a nation that will dwell alone. This has always been the case. It was only when certain Jews who had already gone far down the path of assimilation I'm talking now about the 18th century and the 19th century, when a certain critical mass of such Jews began to appear in Europe, and they did not any longer wish to identify as Jews, they began to search for ways. They began to seek ways and modalities that would allow them to be absorbed into the general society around them. And they found that because of an ingrained anti-Semitism that existed in their host countries, not their homelands, because according to the Torah, no other country on earth except Eretz Yisrael, except for the land of Israel, is the homeland of the Jewish people, or any individual Jew for that matter. It is only an assimilated Jew who feels that he is Hungarian or Russian or British or American. A Jew who feels that way is already admitting that he has lost any meaningful contact with his true Jewish identity. But for such people, one can understand from their warped perspective that the increase of immigration and the weakening of the forces of nationalism within their host countries is to their benefit. This works to increase the likelihood that they will be accepted as part of the fabric of their host societies. But this must be understood to be what it is. This is an assimilationist policy of certain Jews who are no longer Jewish in any meaningful way. This has nothing to do with Judaism and has nothing to do with the Jewish people. This is all about confused Jews who wish to cease being Jewish in any meaningful way. This is all about Jews who know nothing about their Jewish heritage, Jewish culture and civilization, Jewish history and religion. Such people do not represent the Jewish people. Such people, the historical Jewish people, the entity that we refer to in Hebrew as Klal Yisrael, the historical people of Israel who have existed for nearly 4,000 years. They do not represent us. They represent their own particular subjective concerns and goals, and therefore they belong to all kinds of movements, social fads and philosophies. Essentially, we're talking about postmodernist cultural Marxism, which of course is based on, amongst other things, the essential concept that human beings should not identify according to their nationality or their national cultural background and inheritance, but rather human beings should identify according to old communist theory, economic communist theory. They should identify according to their class, say that they belong to the proletariat or to the bourgeoisie, etc. People should belong to a class and consider themselves brothers and sisters of all other people who belong to that same economic class throughout the world, without distinction. It is not by accident, it is not a coincidence that the anthem of communism and socialism is the well-known anthem known by the term the International, the international. In other words, the main thrust of this warped and pernicious ideology, this evil philosophy, is that human beings should tear down the concepts of nationhood and individual cultures and peoples and feel themselves to belong to some sort of internationalist community. This was the basis of Marxist philosophy, which originally took on an economic form. In other words, it related to and and wished to view things through the prism of economics. Later, other people, having seen the complete lack of success of this ideology to bring about any kind of real revolution in the world, changed the focus of Marxism, and they developed something called cultural Marxism, which refers to an intellectually driven philosophy which seeks to convince people, not by force, but by propaganda, by so-called education, that is to say, brainwashing of people over a period of generations, to abandon all kinds of basic ideas and values that that nations, that peoples, that families held dear, have always held dear from time immemorial, to abandon all those ideals and to adopt other notions and other ideas. And one of the terms, and one of the essential terms and essential concepts that were used for this purpose was the term racism. In other words, they trained people, they brainwashed people in the schools, in the newspapers, in the media, through Hollywood films, through films created elsewhere outside of Hollywood, in the universities. They brainwashed people to subscribe to the notion that all cultures are equivalent, that all peoples are the same, there are no differences between nations, between ethnic groups, and that the most desirable utopian reality that could be hoped for in human affairs would be a complete admixture of the nations, of the ethnic groups, and of the cultures. There is much more to be said about this. I do not wish to address all the various aspects of this issue at this moment. What I wish to emphasize at this moment is that these movements exist not because Jews invented them. It is true that there were quite a number of Jews, people of Jewish background, of Jewish descent, involved in these movements, in these philosophies, and in these social and intellectual movements and bodies that promoted these ideas over the many decades, going back to the 1930s. But that does not mean it is in any way a Jewish philosophy. This does not mean that it's in any way in concert with true Jewish concepts and aims. The true aims of the Jewish people are to see every nation, as I have pointed out in previous discussions, according to the Torah, nations should be defined according to their language, shared common language and history and culture and heritage. And according to the Torah, humanity naturally should and inevitably will be divided into nation states, not the concept of the melting pot, which was so very popular in the 1960s and 70s. That is precisely the opposite of what both the Torah and reason and experience have shown us. The Jewish concept of the proper format and mode of existence for humanity is to be divided into those ethnic groupings, each in their own territory, where each is allowed and able to develop its culture and its talents based on its own inherited values and ideologies and beliefs. This is true for the Jewish people and is true for all peoples. The idea, the suggestion that there is some kind of Jewish conspiracy to bring about the opposite of what I have just described is inane. It is in fact the very opposite of what Judaism preaches. The fact that a person who is of Jewish descent may subscribe to such ideas does not make it a Jewish philosophy, a Jewish outlook in any way, shape or form. This is simply a Jew who has lost his way and has joined many other people, some Jews and some non-Jews, who believe in this kind of vision for humanity. It is therefore a very most tragic and lamentable state of affairs that today many people of European descent in different parts of the Western world have either reached the conclusion or have been convinced by others, some of whom may have anti-Semitic agendas and leanings, that the Jews, as a Jewish people, are responsible for and advocate and promote the dilution of the Western world into some kind of second and eventually a third world melting pot. This is not the Jewish vision for humanity. This is quite the opposite. I would agree entirely with those people in the West that the Western world should raise its borders and strengthen their borders against illegal immigration. Immigration policies should be reversed, and the indigenous peoples of the various Western nations should be allowed to live in their own homelands according to their traditional cultures and societal structures and belief systems. That is what should be done for the people in Europe. That is what should be done for the people of Africa. That is what should be done for all nations. The Jews are not responsible for the internationalist, cultural, Marxist, postmodernist agenda of these liberal, so-called self-appointed know-alls who believe that they will bring about a utopian future for humanity. Judaism is in fact opposed to all that these people represent.
The production of these videos and maintaining this channel demands much time and money. If you enjoyed this video, please show your appreciation and support. To make a donation, please go to www.machonshilo.org and press the PayPal button which appears on the upper right-hand side of the home page. To sponsor a video or purchase Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please write us at office@machonshilo.org.